All right, today we're going to break down something that is frankly a terrifying new chapter in America's drug crisis. It's a drug called Tranq, and its effects, well, they're like nothing the country has ever had to deal with before.
This quote, it really just sets the stage perfectly, doesn't it? Because we're not just talking about a new drug here. We're talking about the collapse of the very systems that are meant to protect people. This is a crisis that's unfolding right out in the open.
So let's get into it. What exactly is this new threat? You've probably heard the media give it some pretty chilling nicknames, but to really understand the danger, you have to know what's actually inside of it.
At its very core, Tranq is a toxic cocktail. It starts with fentanyl, which we all know is already the most lethal opioid we've ever seen. But then it adds a powerful animal tranquilizer called xylazine, a chemical that was never, ever meant for human beings. The disconnect here is just staggering. On one hand, you've got xylazine as a legitimate medical tool that vets use to sedate 1,000-pound animals. On the other hand, dealers on the street are using that exact same chemical to cut fentanyl, all to make the high last longer and feel more intense. It's a really horrifying repurposing of medicine.
The street names honestly tell their own story. Tranq is pretty obvious, it's short for tranquilizer. But zombie drug? That name comes from two of its most devastating effects: the almost catatonic, trance-like state it puts users in, and the horrifying flesh-eating wounds it causes.
Okay, so to really understand why Tranq is so destructive, we have to look at how these two very different chemicals interact with the human body, because this isn't just a simple mixture, it's a synergistic nightmare. First, let's just set the baseline. We have to remember what we're dealing with in fentanyl alone. It is 50 times stronger than heroin.
And 100 times stronger than morphine. I mean, that potency, by itself, completely reshaped the opioid crisis.
But it's the microscopic margin for error that is truly terrifying. Just 2 milligrams, that's about the weight of a few grains of salt, can be a fatal dose. So that is the deadly powder that forms the foundation of Tranq.
So what happens when you add xylazine to that already deadly equation? Well, the fentanyl's already shutting down the body's fundamental drive to breathe. Then the xylazine delivers a second, totally separate blow. It's a heavy-duty sedative that depresses the entire central nervous system. The result is this brutal 1-2 punch that leads to prolonged blackouts and a catastrophic drop in the body's blood circulation. And that catastrophic lack of circulation, that is what causes those infamous wounds. The medical term for it is vascular collapse. Blood literally stops flowing to certain parts of the body, and the skin and muscle just begin to rot from the inside out.
And here, this is maybe the single most terrifying part of this chemical combination, especially for first responders. The go-to tool for reversing an overdose, Narcan, is no longer the silver bullet it once was.
The reason why is actually simple, but deadly. Narcan is designed to do one thing: knock opioids like fentanyl off the brain's receptors and restore breathing. But xylazine, it isn't an opioid. It works on a completely different system. So you can give someone Narcan and it might stop the fentanyl, but that person stays deeply sedated. They stay unconscious and their breathing is still dangerously low because of the tranquilizer. They are not out of the woods. And I have to stress, this isn't some theoretical problem. This is a human catastrophe playing out in real time, and ground zero for the Tranq crisis in America is the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia. The outreach workers on the ground there, they describe the scene in really stark terms. It's just a landscape of human suffering, where people are trapped in this cycle of addiction and physical decay, and it's visible on every single street corner. The stories from people using the drug are they're heartbreaking and they're surreal. This quote from a 28-year-old named Amanda really captures the horrifying, almost unbelievable nature of these wounds. They just appear without warning, a direct result of the drug's effect on the body's own circulatory system. And what's so medically unique about these wounds is that they're not the typical abscesses you'd see from a dirty needle. These are necrotic ulcers. They can appear anywhere on the body, even far away from an injection site. They spread with terrifying speed. We're talking growing inches in a matter of days. And if that infection reaches the bone, amputation is often the only option left. When you're faced with a crisis this devastating, it is so easy to feel hopeless. But on the ground and in policy discussions, a different approach is starting to emerge:
one that's focused not on punishment, but on survival and care.
This is all part of an approach called harm reduction, and it's really about meeting people where they are. That means things like mobile wound care vans going directly into encampments. It means massive distribution of Narcan to save lives. It's about providing test strips so people can at least see if their supply is tainted with xylazine. And in places like Canada, you have safe consumption sites that have proven they can prevent fatal overdoses entirely. And when you look at the bigger policy picture, there are proven models we can learn from. Portugal decriminalized drug use and saw their fatality numbers plummet. Canada's supervised injection sites have a perfect record of saving lives during overdoses. These aren't radical ideas, they are evidence-based strategies that finally treat addiction as a public health issue, not a criminal one.
So all of this really leaves us with a fundamental choice. The current approach, it's clearly failing. The question now is whether our response is going to evolve to meet the reality of this epidemic. Are we going to shift from a strategy of punishment to one of compassion and public health? Because that is the conversation we can no longer afford to avoid.